Welcome to the Right to the Point podcast, hosted by the Republican Study Committee. The Right to the Point podcast is the RSC's way of cutting through the noise and telling you what's going on in Washington. This is Congressman Dave Taylor, and we've got a really great episode for you today. Joining me is one of my colleagues, Congressman Warren Davidson, from the great state of Ohio, and Daily Wire investigative reporter Luke Rosiak. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's always good to be on.
Great to be with you guys.
All right, let's get into this episode of the podcast. Let's get right into it. It's a pleasure to, again, be joined by Luke Rosiak, who uncovered a massive Medicare fraud scheme in Ohio. Luke and Congressman Davidson, can you help walk us through what exactly happened in Ohio and how it got this far to individuals taking millions of dollars from the government?
Sure. So a couple of months ago, DOJ and HHS released a database that showed which companies were getting paid by Medicaid. And Medicaid is like 15% of the federal budget, but somehow we never had any idea who was getting paid by it before. The data just wasn't out there. And so this was a huge deal for me as an investigative reporter, and I wanted to just take an analytical look at the data and just run the numbers and see what popped up. And it did take me to Ohio, which I didn't have any intention on focusing on Ohio or Columbus or any particular community, but it took me to Northeast Columbus, which turned out to be actually the Somali area of Northeast Columbus, or really the second biggest Somali settlement in the United States, I think. And so there were some parallels to a lot of the fraud that we've heard so much about in Minneapolis, because most of those were these 12 Medicaid waiver programs, and a waiver is like doing extra stuff that Medicaid was never intended to do, but states have gotten permission to do it. And so the issue with Ohio was this program called home health care, which is not just sending nurses to your house, but also sending regular people to your house to do chores like cooking and cleaning. And then kind of how this program went off the rails is they took it even further, and it just became people's family members getting paid by Medicaid to take care of each other. And so you can literally bill the government for, quote, companionship and conversation. And so it's supposed to be somebody in your family is sick or really old, but you just can bill the government by the hour for, talking to your own aging mother.
Right. Well, I know we've all been shocked by the revelations of Ohio, and Warren, I know you've been following this closely. What are you hearing?
Yeah, we went out on the ground to look at one of these memory care units. So like maybe the best use case for like Ohio's home health care law, like if it helped no one and it was 100% fraud, well, it'd be easy just to kill the whole program. So why do we even have a home health care program? So you look, maybe the best case is you get somebody who's a senior that has Alzheimer's and they need to be cared for in a memory care unit. I mean, that's like north of $20,000 a month in a facility. And, it's on lockdown. You've got care for virtually every aspect of life for a senior adult, generally senior adult. And so if you can find someone who can care for them in their home, they've got to do all the same kinds of things that you would in a facility. So meal prep, security for the place, somebody to be there to provide attention to them. And you can do that for a fraction of the cost, say, $4 grand a month. So it saves the government lots of money and frankly keeps them in a better place in their home.
Right.
So you find, well, what broke, and especially during COVID, kind of some of the checks that used to happen didn't happen the same way. And when you look at propagation of these programs, instead of having unity of command, and I think Vivek Ramaswamy's done a great job of kind of his preview of this, highlighting how many different people get involved in administering the programs in Ohio. So you don't have, when you align responsibility and authority, you can provide accountability. And when it's all diffused, it makes it harder. And these programs are complicated by those factors.
Yeah, no question. I know it's a big problem nationwide, and it's honestly, it's very troubling to see Ohio be such a hotbed for it. We were able to pass a bill that I sponsored out of the House called Deporting Fraudsters, sort of addressing this issue, and actually even got 20 Democrat votes, so that was encouraging. But yeah, this was to close a loophole that somehow defrauding the government out of these federal benefits that are meant for American citizens wasn't something you get deported for. This bill would make sure they're deported and not allowed to reenter. And to put that into perspective, look at the numbers from the Biden administration's fraud. Biden's Medicare and Medicaid programs lost more than $100 billion to improper payments just in 2023. That's 43% of all government-wide improper payments. It's a staggering crisis. Luke, coming back to you, we've all seen the videos of investigative reporters, you, Nick Shirley, other people. What's your reception been like in Ohio? Has Ohio been cooperative? The authorities in Ohio have been cooperative with and helpful in your investigation?
So everybody has, except for the one that matters, which is Governor Mike DeWine and the Ohio Office of Medicaid. Everybody, the auditor, the AG, the legislators, they've all been great. They are up in arms about this. But Ohio Medicaid basically, a big part of my series, which is still rolling out, is showing how criminals are in charge of these programs. Like once you know who's getting paid by home health care, you can look up the owners of those companies. And for example, one of the companies is owned by a husband and wife. The husband has been convicted 3 times of fraud. The wife's been convicted 3 times of theft. They both have various drug and violence and other crimes like that between them. And they were given permission after that to start a home health care company that bills the government $100,000. And this is even though the Ohio Department of Nursing has said this guy is banned from being a home health care nurse because it's too dangerous to go into somebody's house by himself. The government, Mike DeWine's administration, paying for most of it with federal dollars, said this guy can actually own a company and have a whole staff of people that does that, $100,000. And remember, this is basically based on his word that, yes, I had a staff person go to this old lady's house on this time. There's really it's hard to prove, and this is why you don't want to let fraudsters run the program. There's another example where a woman had a daycare shut down for evidence that she was billing for kids that weren't actually there. And her husband had previously been convicted of running one of these these elder scams, pretending to serve old people when he didn't. And so the woman started a home health care company, got approval from Ohio Medicaid to start up. It's been paid $6 million as recently as this month. The checks keep coming. And it shares the address. I mean, the wife is using the same address as the husband, who has a federal felony for stealing from the federal government. He never paid his restitution either, but he says he doesn't have any money. Meanwhile, the wife has got $6 million. So it's like, is anybody minding the store? And I think we saw it yesterday when the FBI came in, thanks to J.D. Vance's fraud task force and Andrew Ferguson, and they made some arrests in Minneapolis, and one of those guys was a home health care operator, and he jumped out a 4th floor window and fled from the FBI. I mean, this is the kind of people that our government has been paying hundreds of billions of dollars because they made unverifiable invoices claiming to have gone to private residences at certain times, and it's all a black box. Some of it is real. There's a few old ladies that really need help, but the whole program is inherently flawed because it's very hard to guard against fraud when you're dealing with what family members do behind closed doors in private residences.
Yeah, no question. And one thing I've seen reports about, and I'd like to hear from either one of you guys if you know more about it than what's been reported, that the software in Ohio, the fraud detection software in Ohio for these programs was actually disabled. I don't know if it was intentionally or accidentally, but if either one of you have heard more about that, that was something that's very concerning that I heard. Have you guys heard any of those kind of reports?
Yeah, that came from my series in the Daily Wire. So in 2006, I think a long time ago, Congress passed this bill, 21st Century Cures Act, which acknowledged that home health care is very susceptible to fraud. And so it did something called electronic visit verification, meaning essentially a phone app that when you, I guess this was passed in 2016, not 2006, but it was supposed to kick in 2020. The rules kicked in that as of 2020, when you went to visit an old lady to provide her home care, you had an app you're supposed to use that tracks, and it just submits your GPS location when you arrive and then when you leave. And that makes sure you were in the right spot for the right amount of time. So apparently Congress gave the states some leeway, make your best efforts. It should be by 2020, but if you can't, try your best and, make electronic records of the location. But the states, at least Ohio, interpreted this in the most pedantic way possible. They really tried to avoid the spirit of what Congress intended. And they dragged their feet, and 5 years after they were supposed to have been doing this, they weren't even doing it at all. They were telling people they were doing it, but if you didn't use the app, nothing would happen. You'd still get paid.
Right.
And so finally the auditor was like, what are you doing? Like, you have to use this app. And so DeWine is like, all right, we'll use the app. But before that, he had to do that. They made a change. GPS could be optional. And he said it was to respect the privacy of the people, which makes no sense because they're billing the government billions of dollars. And the only reason you need privacy is if you want to defraud the government. And so by the time they made EVV mandatory, it was essentially meaningless because GPS was optional and half the people chose to turn that off. And I think that it wouldn't be unfair to infer that that's an admission that half of these visits were fraudulent.
Right.
Yeah, so right now I serve as chairman for national security and illicit finance, and another Ohioan, Joyce Beatty, a Democrat from Columbus, is my counterpart. And the great news is if you're talking about fraud in the sense of senior scam centers and traditional, somebody calling up, scamming grandma or grandpa out of some cash, there's no partisanship there, totally bipartisan. But when you look at how we found some of these things is because Doge, that turned into hyper-partisan, and it was the government's money. The government, of course, should have a responsibility, not just like the right to look at how the money's being spent and where it's being spent, but a moral obligation to look at it. And so they were losing their mind that we were somehow exposing these records, which is the government paid it. Like, well, who did we pay it to? Oh, you got to get a search warrant. Like, for the government to look at who we paid?
Right.
Like, no, like that's supposed to happen. And when you look at improper payments, we don't have, good accounting software. Secretary Bessent, Secretary of Treasury, highlighted that for up to a third of the payments out of the U.S. Treasury, you don't even have the same level of accounting controls that a traditional small business would have. So this goes back to really Doge is really a name for a U.S. digital service, because under Obama, when they tried to launch healthcare.gov, they realized, well, we don't really have government employees that really understand IT. And so we should put some of these kind of skilled people in and build out the infrastructure. And what you look at is just matching principles on accounting, things that you would do. Like, did you actually receive the shipment that you're paying for? Did you even purchase the thing that you're paying for? And then one of the things that Luke highlights, why don't states or local governments help solve these crimes better? Well, they have a structural incentive. I mean, in the case of some of the Medicaid programs, if the state puts in a buck, they get $9 federal back, and that money gets spent in our economy. And so there are a lot of people like, hey, leave that alone. That money's coming to our community. They don't want it in their city, their county, or their state because they want the cash coming in.
Sure.
And, to me, like, that's why we should completely structurally change the government. And I'm not talking incremental tweaks here. Like, I think we should fund federal agencies, State Department, Defense Department, et cetera, and nothing else. No nonprofits, no subsidiary governments, no fire grants, no school grants. It should all go on a per citizen basis to each state. And every state could run their programs maybe a little differently, but they would then have the incentive to be responsible with the money. And also, if we did it on a per citizen basis, it would be 100% at California's expense if they want to pay for things for illegals. We can't get that through the legislature because somehow they're not even supposed to be in the country. So the proper dollar amount for anyone who's a foreign national illegally in the country is zero.
Right.
And we can't get that turned off. We're paying federal matching dollars on some of those things. So I think structurally just overhauling the system is the real remedy.
I couldn't agree more. And to your point about the partisan nature of what we're seeing around the fraud, if Democrats were anything like the people they allege themselves to be, they'd be more angry about this fraud going on than the Republicans are, because the people they purport to care most about are the ones who are harmed most by this fraud, by taking these resources out of play that could be used for people who are actually in need. And to your point about agencies, I couldn't agree more with that either. I talk about it back home as a 10th Amendment audit. Like, bring every one of these agencies in, and if you can point to the article and section of the Constitution that gives you the authority you're exercising over the American people, fine. If not, leave your keys on the table, and we're going to return this to the states where it belongs.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge, right? I mean, a lot of the programs that we fund are for good causes. So when you say, well, do you want to turn it off? Well, I don't want it to not exist. That's not the same thing. but it should exist differently. So that's one of the controversies around like defunding the federal Department of Education, for example. Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't have education. I'm just saying the
Right.
federal government hasn't been helpful.
No.
The results have gotten worse since we had a federal Department of Education. And if we have any money for that cause, just send it to the states. And the right answer is on a per citizen basis, and that solves a whole mess of problems. And then it's fair. Each state's got their own incentives to manage their dollars more wisely.
Right.
And then the federal government really just operates the federal government. Now, we're a long ways off from even thinking about having a vote on a budget like that, but it highlights the structural incentives. And I think that's what Vivek Ramaswamy was doing recently when he's saying, hey, maybe we should hold on to a portion of what we find, a finder's fee. And if you look at whistleblowers, for example, whistleblower for fraud at the Securities and Exchange Commission, they keep 10 to 25% of what they identify as fraud. So you find a $400 million fraud, you could wind up keeping $40 million.
Right.
So the whistleblowers are highly motivated to do that. I think he's talking about it for state governments, but I don't know. But when you look at incentives, it explains a lot. And right now, all the incentives are skewed towards some of these population centers to be able to run scams.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about President Trump's very wise decision to put Vice President J.D. Vance in charge of the new fraud division, standing that up, and also the appointing Brandon Gill, who's done a great job of uncovering fraud and on committee and through his regular duties. Obviously, it's vital. Obviously, we're discovering the scope of this fraud, but Luke, tell us a little bit your thoughts on how that's beginning and your thoughts on how the actual public can be helpful, how we can be helpful to this new fraud division.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It seems like J.D. Vance has done a great job, and he's working with Andrew Ferguson, the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, who was previously a top lawyer in Virginia and did a very good job in that role. So I have a lot of high expectations for these guys, and already they've helped, I think, grease the wheels and make sure that the investigations don't get lost in the cracks somehow. And we saw a number of arrests just yesterday in Minnesota.
Right.
So you were talking about, I think it's tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars here. I do think Medicaid is the big one, and the Democrats basically increased it under Biden as sort of a backdoor universal basic income almost, like without most of us even realizing it. And so Medicaid is now such a massive slush fund that there's a lot of fraud there. It'll be interesting to see whether the Democrats do cooperate, because it should be, as you said, certainly it should be nonpartisan. Nobody should want, these are criminals. And a lot of it is, leaving our country. It's not actually staying in the districts as sort of just general stimulus to the economy. It's actually going to foreign countries.
Right.
And so, I testified to the Senate Small Business Committee this week, and none of the Democrats showed up except Ed Markey, the ranking member, and he didn't ask a single question. And that included a lifelong Democrat who worked for the Tim Walz administration, and she had flagged some fraud, and she described being bullied and persecuted by her bosses there as a whistleblower. And they called her racist because she was saying all this stuff is illegal, you're throwing money out the door. And, I was interested and kind of disappointed to see that Ed Markey had no response to that. He had no questions of any of the witnesses to talk about fraud. They just didn't want to talk about it. But it is real and it's important.
Yeah, no question. Warren?
Luke highlighted one of the challenges there with a lot of the money doesn't even end up staying there. They send it out of the country. And one of the things we did in the big, beautiful bill last summer was tax remittances. Mm-hmm. So money going out of the country, having a very modest tax on it matters. But one of the things Secretary Besson, Secretary of Treasury, highlighted is we should be turning off anyone who's here claiming asylum and refugee status, certainly anybody who's not legally here. They shouldn't be able to send money out of the United States. Right? How should you have access to our banking payment system if you're here illegally in the first place?
Right.
And the president just put out an executive order on that to put pressure on banks they're already obligated legally to know their customer. Well, if your customer is here in the United States legally, why do they have an account?
Right.
Illegally. If they're not here legally, you shouldn't be doing business with them. But in terms of being able to send foreign wires, part of the structural incentive for illegal immigration to the United States is some of these countries, remittances from people that come to the United States and send money back home is a significant part of their economy, their GDP. I mean, some countries is as high as 10% of their GDP is, their citizens get somewhere else and send money back home.
No question.
And this is part of, I think, the draw. It serves as a magnet, too. I think that not all the Bhutanese and Somalis who are in Ohio were dropped there by the Biden administration. They came there in part to get in on the home health care scheme. And they drained the federal dollars and also 30% plus state dollars. And then the money may go abroad. And they're also using various welfare schemes. And so, yeah, it sounds like it's bringing money to your district, but really it's kind of backfires.
Right. And on that same point, we've recently sponsored a bill because some of these states have been reluctant to turn over their data on SNAP. I know Medicaid's, like as you said, the bigger leak, but SNAP's also a huge leak. A lot of especially blue states are refusing to turn over their data. We sponsored a bill to require the last 5 years of data from every state, and for every state to give an annual report on their SNAP fraud findings. So hopefully that passes, that data becomes helpful to the vice president and to Brandon Gill and everybody else involved on the fraud. This segment, we're going to do a little bit of unfiltered. Hopefully you guys have a great idea prepared for this. Your hot take. So whether it's pineapple on pizza is okay or not okay, your favorite food, if you have a thought along those lines, we love to hear it. If not, we can skip it.
Well, I mean, when it comes to food, beef is, if I had to eat only one thing, I would eat beef every day. Beef already has vegetables because beef eats vegetables.
This isn't controversial.
We're all in agreement
with this.
I truly do not get the people that go vegan, vegetarian, whatever. But it's America. You're free to choose to do that, and that just lowers beef prices for me.
I've been trying to. There's a pizza place near me that has ice cream, and it's vegan. Like half of them are dedicated to vegan flavors. And I've been telling the guy, I'm gonna stop coming here if you don't. And I got my kids to tell him too. Like these slots, you have 10 flavors.
Right.
Half of them are vegan. You're taking up slots that we could have for normal people who aren't freaks. We got to get the vegans are.
Well, I agree with both of those. Not that they're not hot, they're just both very accurate takes. But for me, because I'm not as close to Cincinnati as Warren, of course, he's got some of that area, but I grew up around Cincinnati chili, and everybody's like, which one's the best one? And the truth of the matter is, it's a mixed bag. Skyline chili, best for 3 ways. Gold Star chili, best if you're just having a bowl of chili. And I'll die on that hill.
I'll give you one. So I grew up in this area. I've been in D.C. my whole life. There are people from here. There's not many of us. But as I became more conservative, I moved out to a little farm in Virginia because I think that's really important to preserve that. I think that the rural lifestyle and conservative politics are intrinsically intertwined. And when the Democrats, and we talked about this some before here, when the Democrats win, it's often because they've urbanized an area. It's very important to preserve that rural culture, and I think that's the real American culture. So I have a little hobby farm with goats and chickens and things like that, and I also have bees. And oddly enough, it's made me a bit of a feminist. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think I believe in the matriarchy.
Yeah.
Because when you have livestock, you start to realize that us men, we don't do very much in society, at least if you can learn from the animal kingdom. Because my chickens... The roosters are horrible. They annoy everybody. All the eggs come from the hens, the females. My goats, I milk my goats every morning and get this delicious milk. You know what male goats do? They pee on their own faces. They're disgusting. They do nothing. And then bees, every single worker bee that makes honey is a female. The men, they do nothing.
Right.
They just wait and they procreate once and then they die after that. And it's funny because in the summer, when that season is over, the female bees will pick up the male bees and just throw them to the ground. And they're so lazy, they just lie there and die. And so the animal kingdom is pushing the matriarchy on us.
Well, that makes some sense. And I couldn't agree more about what you said about keeping rural areas rural. Believe me, the 2nd District of Ohio is rural. It's all Appalachian, and we want to keep it that way, but with some responsible growth and development. Well, this is an awesome episode. Thank you guys for being with me. I really enjoyed being with you. Nice to meet you, Luke, and always good to be with you, Warren. Thank you so much for joining us. Tune in next week for another can't miss episode of the podcast, and be sure to follow the Republican Study Committee on all social media platforms, from Twitter to Instagram, Facebook, Rumble. The handle is @Republican Study, and we're signing off here. So thank you for listening. Great being with you.